Hello everyone! Our ranking of all Harry Potter games with the help of my Stanislav scoring system described in the pinned comment continues with games based on the Part 1 of the Deathly Hallows movie adaptations. We all know what reputation those games tend to have, so let's get straight to it. I can't help but feel a certain sense of déjà vu when playing EA Bright Light's Deathly Hallows Part 1 game. Like with Goblet of Fire 5 years before it, there's been a sudden shift from an open-world action-adventure into a far more linear action game. This time it's a third-person cover shooter, or Gears of Potter, if you will. And I really don't envy the developers who had to work on this project. It clearly had a very tough production, which is evident by just how broken everything is. It's like the game got a certification pass because, technically speaking, you can reach its ending. Even if there wouldn't be bugs, Deathly Hallows would still be a quite questionable experience anyway. In terms of core gameplay, there's barely any differentiation between various spells, you can't fire continuously, so you need to keep pressing the controller's trigger over and over again, there is lack of feedback regarding your health state or where you're getting fired from, and plenty of other issues. But they all are not important in comparison to the real problem. The game just refuses to function properly. Sometimes the cover button literally doesn't work until you press it more than a dozen times, even in the tutorial where you're specifically asked to press it. Perhaps your opponents and allies have the same issues, as they are unlikely to take cover, or try to flank one another, or do anything at all, really. There's progression blockers too. A trigger after taking a quest object might not process until you reload the game. And then there's just inconsistent mechanics. For example, sometimes a dragon attack will kill you instantly, even when usually you need to get damaged by the fire 3 times before dying. Why are you going into a cave of a dragon in the first place, you might ask? That didn't happen in the movie, and the answer to that is... because! The game has a bunch of mandatory side missions to complete without any explanation why you're doing them. You can even find a newspaper in that dragon's den. Deathly Hallows Part 1 often doesn't make sense. Muggles noticing you without an invisibility cloak will lead to a failure, but then after an arbitrary checkpoint it won't. And you know what? You will be glad to stay out of the invisibility cloak whenever possible, because the movement mechanics with it are just so sluggish. Plus, there's the whole thing with the cloak having to recharge when you stand still unless there's an enemy nearby. So if you get cornered and the guards bug out and decide to not continue their patrol, well, it's time to reload. And the game just looks weird. Despite the adequate visual fidelity, characters have wooden animations, lip sync feels robotic, and the lighting in levels works really strange. For example, here you can't help but feel that it's not how light should fall on these faces. It's not like the game doesn't have nice things. It adapts the story well enough, even if only because the source material was separated in 2 parts, its plot was spread a bit thin in the first place. For what it's worth, there's stuff that was cut out from the film, like Ron confirming that a charm was placed to detect anybody mentioning the name Voldemort, which actually explained some moments that didn't quite make sense in the movie. There are also some nice lore collectibles in the form of the Potterwatch podcast-like thing made by Fred and George, which delves deeper into things happening at Hogwarts while we're out there searching for Horcruxes. And that sort of stuff is what saves the game from getting a Statocritic rating lower than 13. But at the end of the day, it is still a fundamentally broken experience that very often doesn't quite make sense. Developed by Full Fat, Deathly Hallows Part 1 for DS shows similar signs of being a difficult and potentially rushed project. but at the very least it's not broken like the console PC game. Still, there are some issues that you need to get used to. For example, despite almost fully touch-based controls, your character casts spells only in 80 directions, which means you're not always shooting exactly where you're tapping. That feels weird, but you can get used to it. What you might never get used to is silence that prevails for the duration of practically the entire game. There is a distinct lack of not just music, but any sound assets. Words won't do this justice, you have to hear it for yourself. Or, well, not hear it. Honestly, if done on purpose in some creepy or spooky game, this could actually work really well. But in general, Deathly Hallows Part 1 is a mostly adequate, if somewhat an impressive action RPG. Levels are really linear, plus you'll have to tackle some weird stuff, among which are crafting minigames that break the flow every time you want to make a potion. I love the concept of potion brewing, but this is definitely not the right minigame for this genre. Then sometimes it's really not clear how to progress. For example, in a mission where you're supposedly trying to avoid Death Eaters with an invisibility cloak, certain areas are blocked until you defeat those Death Eaters in combat. If you happen to fall in the middle of the Venn diagram between being a big action RPG fan and a big Harry Potter fan, you might enjoy this title with a Stasucritic rating of 42. It adapts the story better than the console version, and there are some interesting conceptual ideas like a multiplayer mode that I couldn't play, but it still sounds intriguing. One person plays as Harry Potter and the other controls Dementors trying to catch him. But overall, the game is... Enjoyment of it depends entirely on your tastes. The Java Deathly Hallows Part 1 by EA Mobile has been an incredibly pleasant surprise for me. The game didn't try to reinvent the wheel with new mechanics like the console and Nintendo DS adaptations, but rather it iterated on the Half-Blood Prince gameplay, and it shows. Deathly Hallows Part 1 is really big. And this might sound funny considering that it can be beaten in 2 hours, but that's twice more than the standard length of an hour most similar Java games have. In fact, Deathly Hallows Part 1 is so big that the cut-down versions for weaker phones outright remove some of the first levels instead of having them in a simplified format. And like before, we'll cover only the fullest version of the game. Yeah, sure, less levels leads to a different experience, and I often separate that kind of stuff into different entries. But there is just too many variations, even with versions that feel like they should be the same. For example, on one phone, enemy composition in a level can consist only of spiders, while on another the same level has spiders and snakes, which provides a different gameplay experience as snakes are slower and don't jump at you. And that's just a single example, there is far more than that, which is why with Java games, unless they're absolutely different, I just limit myself to one version that has the most content and visual assets. Now, back to the topic at hand, Deathly Hallows Part 1 impressed me in 3 areas. First, in terms of core gameplay, Deathly Hallows has added the potential to be a bit creative with your strategies. Most spells are automatically applied to respective objects. However, there are some that you choose as active part of your arsenal, so you can perform some nice little combos like summoning several snakes with Serpent Sortia and then stunning enemies with Expelliarmus while the animals are dealing with them. But be careful, snakes don't care that you summon them and will attack you should there be no other enemy around. It's not something particularly deep or requiring tons of skill mastery, but it's certainly nice. Then, the levels are pretty varied. There is one that has a big focus on stealth, though if you want to go in once blazing, the game won't stop you. There's a whole level dedicated to sort of survival in the woods, a level that's just one big boss battle, and they're all fairly interesting in their own way, supported by a bunch of bonus objectives and a light RPG skill progression system. Oh, and like in the DS version, there's potion brewing, but you don't have to complete any sort of minigames, just have the needed ingredients, which I feel is the preferred way for such crafting in this sort of gameplay. Doesn't halt the pace. And finally, I was impressed by the quality of the story adaptation, especially considering that this is a Java game. Sure, there aren't as many dialogues as there are in the Game Boy Color RPGs, for example. A lot of the narrative is represented through huge chunks of text before levels. But everything flows so nicely, there's never a question what's happening or why. And also there's just a lot of objects in the levels that explore the lore of the world, adding more depth to it. Thanks to all these aspects, even though neither of them are exemplary on their own or anything, I've had a lot of enjoyment with this title. I would even say an unexpected amount of enjoyment. It was really fun, if sometimes simplistic with its pillar and buttons puzzles, and sometimes a bit clunky with spell targeting, but thanks to its variety in terms of pacing and style of challenges, the game never left me bored. Because of all this increased quality in every other area, it's all the more noticeable that there is barely any music or sound effects. There is not a lot of difference between playing the game on mute, which is regrettable, but visually the art is pretty impressive still, so at least there's that. Deathly Hallows Part 1 for mobile phones is getting a Stasocritic rating of 77. It's not a game that's going to wow you with its depth or creativity or anything like that, but it's a very solid title, and more than that, it's a solid story adaptation of the source material, which has sort of become a rarity in the world of Harry Potter tie-ins. Harry Potter is back in LEGO form, developed by Traveller's Tales in what by this time is a traditional style for their LEGO action-adventure titles. 6 levels for each of the first 4 movies adapted here, bunch of collectibles, characters, unlockables, abilities. Now, I have nothing against reusing the formula as long as the implementation is good, but in the case of Harry Potter, it's somewhat stretched thin. A big part of that relates to the new addition to LEGO games in the form of spellcasting, which for all intents and purposes are multiple switchable abilities that your core set of characters learns through various years at Hogwarts, alongside a considerable number of passive abilities like Mandrake handling. There's a bunch of weird side effects this has on the whole traditional LEGO game structure. For one, there's more than 100 characters, many of which have alternate skins, but to 100% the game you need to unlock about 5? 6? So unless you're interested in your favorites or just want to actually reach that 100% completion, there is no reason to be particularly engaged with the minifigure collectathon aspect, as most have the exact same set of spells and abilities. And you learn those spells and abilities by participating in non-replayable classes and various puzzle scenarios between the core 6 levels per movie. The huge amount of story and progression content happening outside of those levels puts the whole adherence to the 6-level structure under question. Doesn't help that the main levels aren't particularly great either. Many are essentially linear pathways of destructible and interactable objects. And that would be absolutely fine if the free-play mode you unlock after completing the story mode would enhance the explorative nature of the gameplay and add a bunch of secrets to discover, but what free-play amounts to most of the time is just the ability to destroy some objects you couldn't before. There's practically no hidden areas and barely any unique free-play puzzles. It's just acceptable content that often isn't even that engaging to interact with, due to the wonkiness of automatic targeting, so very often you have to resort to manual targeting that's a bit cumbersome as you have to initiate it through holding the cast button. And while humor is absolutely subjective, for me a lot of attempts at being funny in the levels or the voiceless retelling of the Harry Potter story in cutscenes just fell flat. Also, I must say that visually the game often feels weird due to environments being too realistic in comparison to the cartoony LEGO characters and interactable objects. Of course, this helps with noticing gameplay elements, but it looks inconsistent. So the game's golden path is certainly adequate, but I wouldn't call it particularly engaging unless you're a big LEGO fan. However, I can't say that I didn't enjoy the game because there's a huge amount of actually interesting content outside of the main campaign. Diagon Alley, Leaky Cauldron and Hogwarts all form together not just a hub between levels, but a massive amount of playable areas with various secrets, puzzles, and a whole lot of optional rooms to discover. Even with the limited amount of characters required to go through it all, it's been just really enjoyable to roam around the school and discover all of its secrets. To me, that was certainly a much stronger part of the game than the somewhat underwhelming 24 levels. In Gringotts Bank, you will also be able to unlock a special level builder mode, which is a really great tool in comparison to how the original LEGO creator Harry Potter games have worked. You might remember that I've been lamenting how those games acted like software tools that don't fit with the way you think about Legos, which would be first taking a piece and then deciding what to do with it. But the interface in this game is built precisely with that in mind. It's a shame that there's no way for players to share their creations. The, by this point also traditional, bonus level where you have to get 1 million LEGO studs is pretty fun from the perspective of putting you into the shoes of Voldemort on the night when he killed Harry's parents. There's also quite a lot of nice details and Easter eggs you discover by free playing through the Hogwarts hub, for example that Lucius Malfoy's boggart is Voldemort and the ridiculous spell puts a baby pacifier into his mouth. These parts are also when I found the LEGO humor to be actually funny and appropriate. So in the end, I will assign a Stasocritic rating of 73 to LEGO Harry Potter Years 1-4. If we limit the discussion to the main campaign, then it's just an alright if somewhat derivative game, but the side content and explorable Hogwarts with tons of secrets and bonuses transforms it into something more. TT Fusion's handheld versions of LEGO Harry Potter are best described as such. Imagine the main campaign of the console version with a different perspective, but now there is no explorable Hogwarts or Diagon Alley to balance out the average levels. And while the top-down gameplay itself is fine enough, after practically every spell you have to complete a minigame, and some of those minigames can take a long time even on touchscreen devices. So with pretty basic and not particularly exciting levels, the flow of which constantly gets broken by minigames, it's difficult to find something engaging, even though the overall structure makes sense. There's also pretty weird stylistical inconsistencies with the humor and storytelling. The game regularly reuses cutscenes from the console version, which don't have any actual dialogue lines or voice acting, just mumbles and emotions. But then during gameplay there's a lot of text conversations. As a result of this combination, the story often feels a bit weird and disjointed. Handheld LEGO Harry Potter will get a Stasocritic rating of 45. Don't get me wrong, the game is adequate enough and someone may find enjoyment in it, but to me it's a pretty meh experience. The console and DS Deathly Hallows Part 1 tie-ins sadly aren't particularly great games. The mobile version though was a very pleasant surprise, and it's one of the reasons why it's sad that Java games tend to be ignored. The LEGO games that were released this year aren't as great as I would have hoped, but they're still enjoyable. Now, I will be honest, at first I was thinking of covering both Part 1 and Part 2 games in a single video, but it started becoming somewhat too big, and I figured that keeping to a chapter per movie principle is still fine. So, until next time.
Stupefy! Stupefy!
Nobody is...